Thank you all. Then it's visible now.
Yes, ma'am, it's visible.
Okay. So this is my broad theme, that challenges in feminist research methods. Next slides, please. Uh,
The next slide.
yes.
Yes.
No, this one. Okay. Thank you. Yes, yes. As we know, and we have been introduced already by Dr. Ferdinando, that social research is all about production of social knowledge, and methods are actually about the techniques, about the tools of research, data collection, etc., and which is guided by some rationale, some research strategy, or methodological knowledge, mediated by epistemological positions. Now, for me, I would like to start with this very important question, that is there any feminist research method at all? And to emphasize on this prefix feminist. And if there are feminist research methods, and in this point, I would like to make second important question in feminist research, discussing understanding feminist research, that what actually makes feminist research unique. And challenges in feminist research are actually to be understood in the light of this debate on methods, methodology, and this prefix, that is feminism or feminist itself. So, next slides. Uh, so, to discuss this, I would like to start with uh, two core dimensions of feminist research. Uh, Now, to start with, there is nothing distinctive about feminist methods. I would like to start with this submission, like many other feminist scholars, that there is nothing such distinctive about feminist methods, because methods used in other social researches are broadly used in feminist researches. Then, what makes feminist research unique, or how in the feminist researches, we understand method as important? It is actually the perspective that makes feminist research unique. uh, Perspective means here looking at an issue from feminist perspective. So when we talk about, once again, feminist perspective, we know there are not one single perspective, rather multiple perspectives. So the broad two broad or core dimensions of feminist research are: number one, that feminist research promotes new knowledge about women, and of late we talk about incorporating about gender, to study women's experiences of everyday living, recognize recognizing the sexual gender divisions of society, to understand the patriarchal system, norms, culture, values, the structures, and to enrich research with these assumptions, and particularly with women's perspectives. So, this is the first most important feature or dimension of feminist research that makes it different from other researches. The second important one is the goals of feminist research. There is an evident goal of feminist research, a professed goal of feminist research, that is social transformation or social change. And feminist research aims to create awareness about hierarchy, about subjugation, of marginalization, of women's invisibility in social processes, thereby committing to change the situation. So, if we think about the basic dimensions or goals of feminist research, then it actually reflects a critical understanding of research in two terms. That is, one is research as academic pursuit, and secondly, research as practice. This is a very important starting point of feminist research. The boundaries of academic pursuit and practice, and how these two boundaries are actually negotiated. Next slides.
The next slide, please.
That is you.
Feminist research, when we talk about feminist research, we would like to begin with how it is guided. As we know that research is guided by methodological positions, by epistemological positions, and then comes the question of method. Choosing or selecting a method is actually mediated by the methodological and epistemological positions. In that sense, feminist research is guided mostly by feminist theories, of course, taking into account the social theories in general, but feminist theories actually contribute the most in understanding the very scope of feminist research methods. Now, in short, the feminist theories are addressing, or they are mostly addressing the critique, addressing to the critique of classical social theories, how as broadly androcentric in nature, uh, arguing, cutting across the inherent divisions within the feminist schools. They believe that there are implicit masculinist assumptions in classical social theories, privileging male positions or male perspectives. So, how social researchers have been guided by these male perspectives, ignoring or marginalizing or silencing women's voices, experiences, women's perspectives, and how women have been defined as the other to male norms of scientific or objective cultures. Now, here I would like to mention a very interesting quote from Simone de Beauvoir, her very famous book, The Second Sex. She writes, humanity is male, and man defines woman not in herself, but as relative to him. He is the subject, she is the other. So, feminist research actually takes into cognizance this othering of woman in classical social theories, and challenges it in its criticism of positivism, in its criticism of blatant empiricism. So they may broadly term it as the male stream research method. Mainstream research methods or mainstream research space is male stream research. And in that argument, feminist scholars, as I have already mentioned, they have undertaken different epistemological and methodological positions. It's not about one perspective or one approach, but it's about different theoretical positions the feminists have undertaken. And the feminist research process reflects these different theoretical positions in identifying the method, in identifying the methodological positioning. So it's actually integrally linked to these epistemological and methodological positions. Now, the second important point I would like to mention about feminist research, and one important challenge that's related to feminist research, is feminists' commitment to political engagement or the issue of power. This is what makes feminist research very important, unique, or different from so called mainstream researches. Feminist research actually involves both theory and practice, what we broadly term as feminist praxis, to produce knowledge useful to change the society. So, reflecting on the scope of social change, to talk about power and challenge the power relations that produce inequality, oppressive structures, values in society. So, feminist research is inherently having an emancipatory potential, and both in terms of its academic scope and in terms of its practical concerns. So, when we talk about feminist research, the scholars argue that it should be having concerns, it should have concerns about academic goals along with certain political objectives, political goals of change being the one of the important criteria or one of the important aims of feminist research. Next slides, please. Now I would like to talk about, with this reference of discussion, I talk about some of the tension zones in feminist research. When we talk about feminist research, when we adopt feminist research method, we are actually being influenced by some of these tensions, some of the debates in feminist. There are many others, but I have chosen to talk about some core tension zones. The first one is adding women as feminist analysis. Now, we know that traditional feminist scholars and traditional feminist analysis have sought to add women into the mainstream social researches as feminist perspective, the dominant feminist perspective. The early feminist scholars, they have done that. But this talked about locating women's role in public life, which was dominantly understood as male space, and restoring women's visibility from the margins. Uh, it had these traditional assumptions. It started with, and it worked a lot on traditional assumptions of women as victims. So, trying to understand, locate the spaces of victimization or victimhood, and to restore women's positions in terms of the invisible spaces in public life. However, we know that subsequently it extended to the argument that women are not the passive victims of uh, inequality or suppression, but they are also having active agency in resistance. So later, in terms of adding women, the feminist researchers have focused on women's agencies. In academic spaces, they talked about how women scholars have resisted in the male's space of academic domains in the universities, in the research areas, and how they have tried to collate women's scholars' writings. Women's study research centers have been growing up with trying to restoring women's visibility in different spaces, and how we talk about, for example, how we talk about placing gender as a very important issue for textbooks, for basic social science study and science courses. So this is one important issue, but at the same time, there is a problem of framework. There is a danger, actually, of appropriating or endorsing dominant androcentric standards of public life in this process of fitting women into it. So the later feminist scholars have argued that the point is not to add women, but the point is to challenge, the question, the maleness of the public life. So I think I can give one example that when we talk about women's political representation, we research on women's political representation through reservation. We find how patriarchal norms are being enmeshed into this discussion of women's, adding women into the political public space. Just it raises a very important debate in that. So adding women have some this framework has some problematic spaces. The second important tension zones in feminist research, not in feminist research methods, but I would say in feminism itself, is the question of diversity and recognition of difference. Feminist scholars are becoming more and more vocal about sensitivity about women's plural experiences or identities, women's varied experiences in terms of class, caste, race, religion, etc. So, identity politics is becoming important in feminism, in feminist movement, and in feminist research method. It has serious implications, having some very critical, putting some very critical challenges. So instead of homogenizing women's experiences, feminist research need to explore the inherent multiple plural varieties of experiences. So one may say that challenges for researcher would be not to talk for women, not to talk about women, but for which women, how to talk about. So these become important. Like I just would like to give one example from India, that Dalit feminist scholars are articulating their strong reservations about insensitivity of mainstream feminist movement to their causes, to their experiences, to their languages. If you go through, I'm as a gender and media researcher, I find Facebook's, Instagram, Dalit women's Instagram pages are flooded with examples of their dissent, of their this kind of a denial, of a subtle exclusion of diversity. And I think you all know about Bell Hooks, Gloria Watkins, who who used to write her pen name into small case letters to just to focus attention on the message rather than herself. And she was a very vocal, prolific advocate of Black feminism. So this is one very important issue, diversity and difference, that should be incorporated into the scope of feminist research methods. And lastly, the most important area, I think, is the role of researcher. Since the feminist research pursues certain goals, certain evident goals, so there comes the question of the self, the role of researcher as the self. And so it challenges the objective, the dissociated role of researcher as primarily embodied in positivistic and scientific empiricist inquiry. It talks about more of a personal inclusion, the question of self. That is important. Feminist researchers are increasingly using I instead of the author, the researcher, etc. So, introducing subjectivity in research as against objectivism, and there's this recognition of self prioritizes certain specific methods over others. For example, conversational methods. For example, autoethnography. If possible, if I get time, I will be, I may discuss a little bit about this also. And secondly, in this role of researcher, another important point is feminist research actually demands the challenging the traditional hierarchical relationship between the researcher and the researched. That they argue in the importance of non-exploitative connectedness in research, empathy instead of expert knowledge, and by that how to listen to the silenced voices, marginal voices. So this is a very important challenge in feminist research, to negotiate with the self in the research process. Next slide, please. Now, with these references, I would like to come back to the debates on methods. The very important one, the most significant one, is the paradigm debate. We talk about the binary of quantitative and qualitative debate. We know that many of the scholars, they have argued that feminist research is essentially qualitative in nature. But we know that there are these negotiation is a very important subject matter of feminist research method. How to come out of this binary of public, private, rational, intuitive, objective, subjective. And these are sourced from ideological, methodological positions. So qualitative analysis and methods are more popular in feminist researches, but quantitative methods are actually supplementing the qualitative methods in understanding the differences, the sameness, these issues. So qualitative method is more flexible in nature. It gives allowance to multiple views, plurality of experiences, and also a transdisciplinarity that's going beyond stricter disciplinary borders to incorporate from different sources. Its narrative, interpretative, and what been discussed in the introductory lecture, the very important cultural context. Qualitative analysis allows to address this cultural context more skillfully. But as I said, the contemporary feminist scholars are talking about these quantitative methods, quantitative techniques to increase the verifiability of researches. But the most important thing is the perspective. That is important than this kind of a dichotomy. Now, the second important debate is question about this passionate personal knowledge. Since feminist scholars, they are focusing on personal passionate knowledge in the research versus the validity and reliability of data. Now, the feminist research has challenged the value freedom of traditional researchers without rejecting the empiricist goals of organized knowledge. Many criticism have been there that the personal account the feminists are talking of may not be adaptive to broader generalizations. But what they say, the feminist researchers argue that women generally share a familial embeddedness in women's experiences as women, despite their diverse socio-cultural economic context. Like Sandra Harding argued that women's personal experience is a more complete and less distorting kind of social experience, and thus it is a significant indicator of reality. So one challenge is to understand this passionate knowledge in terms as against vis-a-vis the objective empiricist knowledge. And here comes the question of sampling, because feminist researchers focus on microsampling has been uh, definitely challenged by many social researchers as absence of generalization, scope of generalizations, and particularly not problematic in terms of public policy. And in that sense, feminist researchers are broadly adopting these multi-method researches, the triangulation of methods, mixed method researches. These are becoming more popular to address this kind of criticisms or debates. Next slides, please. So with this uh, basic core issues in feminist research debates, the critical areas, I would just like to browse very fast on different methods that have been used in social science researches that are also used in feminist researches, but with a different perspective, feminist perspective. So the popularity of conversational methods, life history methods, document analysis, field and ethnographic research in participant observation, feminist action researches, and critical discourse analysis. So, reformulating the focus, strategy, power relationship in the traditional methods that actually implies the unique perspective of feminism. So, it's more participatory in nature, it would be more in depth investigation, exploratory, and self reflexive in nature. Next slides, please. Uh, that is true also for adopting quantitative methods. So, how feminists have mended quantitative methods in their perspectives or in incorporating their perspectives. So, of late, these quantitative case studies, survey, these are very important, popular ones. With the use of technology and statistical modeling, we may find different newer variants of quantitative methods in feminist perspective. One is latent variable mixture modeling, which is a hybrid model that focuses on large population with varieties, diverse subpopulation, and statistical modeling on that, so that one can arrive at general conclusions or general assumptions with individual experiences of subpopulation. The next slides. I would like to finish my discussion with these two quotes. And I think, as Dr. Ferdinando has talked about critical realism, talked about the importance of structures and agency, the culture as an important context. So, feminist research methods, feminist research itself and its inherent methods are undergoing serious transformation over the years. And two important, I may sum up this whole discussion with these two. One is Clara Greed, who talked about that. So I am studying a world of which I myself am part, with all the emotional involvement and accusations of subjectivity that this creates. I do not attempt to keep my surveyors at arm's length and do research on them as my subjects whilst maintaining a dominant position, as is common in much traditional objective research. So this is talking about what we have already we have so far discussed about passionate knowledge, about personal knowledge. And the second one is by Liz Kelly, that talks about this negotiation between the quantitative and qualitative ones, that rather than assert with primacy of any method, we are not working with a flexible position. Our choices of method or methods depends on the topic and scale of the study in question. Whenever possible, we would combine and compare methods in order to discover the limitations and possibilities of each. So with this, I like to finish my discussion that what are the broad challenges in feminist researches. I hope I have been able to mention the basic core points. There are many other arguments I would have liked to include if time permitted. Thank you all.
Thank you. Am I audible? Thank you, ma'am, for your brilliant presentation. And I would like to request the participants, if you have any question, you can kindly type in the chat box. In the meantime, I have a query. So with your permission, ma'am, I would like to share. Ma'am, could you please enlighten us in regard of fourth wave of feminism? So where what we have seen, like the stalwarts, they are giving emphasis on gender neutrality. So, how would you uh, highlight this particular point, and what is your argument in this regard? Thank you.
Shall I answer one or individually, or take up all the questions?
Ma'am, I'll see that if there any other question in the chat box, then ma'am you can answer all the questions together. So
Uh,
just
I
give me
think
1 minute.
there is one question from Ashok Nath. He writes, so far I have understood that your research topic is purely gender-based. I have one important query regarding I can't see the whole message actually. Can you just
Just a second, ma'am. I can
yes,
help
yes.
you. Uh, so the technical team, can you help me to find out that message, please?
Yeah, in the meantime, I go on answering your query.
Yes.
Let me check the chat box later. Yes, as I think because of the short time, I have not dealt upon the different epistemological positions within feminism as a movement, but actually I situated my discussion on some very broad and core assumptions common to the feminist scholars. And definitely, as I mentioned, that adding woman to adding gender was one important transition in at least from late 1960s 70s. That was one important transition in feminist researches. And post-feminism actually definitely is talking about gender neutrality. But one important thing is meant to mention here is that in this sense, gender neutrality actually, as I mentioned, that these epistemological theoretical positions are mediating the choice or selection of methods. I would like to mention one important thing is that autoethnography. I have just mentioned this, and autoethnography actually talks about the different experiences of individuals beyond their gender identity. So the question came in the issue came whether the male cannot be a good feminist researcher. So that actually the post-feminist researchers tried to address this issue, and individuals' experiences not simply as women or as in terms of an gender identity, but more in terms of an individual that is becoming important in you can see it in terms of autobiographical, the more popularity of autobiographical researches in. And I also find it's very important connections in the intersectional researches, and particularly in India you find some of the marginalized communities, women or gendered third gender communities, they are taking up these issues together to uh, share their experiences, not simply as individual or simply as gendered their gendered lives, but their own experiences as individual. But I think this cutting across the differences to gender neutrality is an important point, is an important challenge to achieve in the feminist research method till today.
Thank you so much, ma'am. We have three questions, but due to the paucity of time, we will be taking two questions. And whatever the questions are coming, so we will be mailing those questions to our respected speakers. and they will clarify your doubts. I'm addressing to the participants according to their convenience. So the second question what we have, I'm reading that question for you, ma'am. Uh, it's from S. Janaki. Good evening, madam. If research is on quantitative one, can we say it will be qualitative? By S. Janaki. This is the second question. Shall I repeat it, ma'am?
Yes, please.
Yeah, the question is, if research is on quantitative one, can we say it will be qualitative?
Definitely not. I think if you talk about quantitative methods, you are using certain quantitative techniques, then it can't be a qualitative, essentially a qualitative one. But you can, I think you may be confusing it in terms of two words. One is method and another is analysis. With quantitative method, you can definitely reach to qualitative analysis, but quantitative method itself is not equal to qualitative methods.
Thank you, ma'am. The other question is from Shreyashi Chaudhary. What are the problems confronted feminist researchers in this pandemic era?
Ah, yes, I have not worked much upon this. Now I think I am slowly getting into it. I am just giving you one example that since I'm interested to work more on gender and media. So I find that this is a very interesting issue that come up in the social media spaces, and feminists, the organizations, the scholars, the activists, they are utilizing the very scope of social media in this pandemic situation, where you are endorsing or enforcing actually the physical disconnectedness in doing any kind of work, not simply researches. And one example I can give you that how the Instagram pages in the Facebook's Instagram pages. I think you must have seen that the anti-CAA protests. These have their sit-in protests in different parts of the different parts of India in different cities. Now, once this after this pandemic, they have moved on to the digital space, and they are utilizing the very scope of digital technology to continue their protest. So these are the challenges, how to overcome the physical connectedness and to be physical disconnectedness and to be socially connected even after that.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your presentation. Uh, we are really sorry because due to the paucity of time, we won't be able to take more questions, but we will be sending these questions to our respected speaker via mail, and she will give answers or will clarify your doubts as per her convenience. So thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Kaberi Chakrabarti, and thank you all of you who raised questions.